Okay, I'm gonna try not to crunch in the meeting.
Are we ready?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure. Okay, so I'm gonna call to order the work session for the Oregon City Commission for Wednesday, August 7th. Who's doing this one?
I am.
Me.
Mr. Lewis.
Wait.
Thank you. Oh,
Go for it.
thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. So for tonight's work session, we want to introduce the topic of water capital improvement plan update and also bring to you the some of the rate analysis work that we've been doing. So we've got two consultants here tonight, Brian Ginter with Murray Smith. Brian, come on up so you can present your section. And then John Ghilarducci with FCS Group. We really are going to have two separate slide presentations. One's more about the engineering side, the other one's about the financial side. So look forward to that. I know how much you like our presentations.
I love it.
Commissioner. So the other thing I just want to acknowledge is we got this on the agenda. We've been working diligently on kind of last minute pieces, but it's definitely introduction. Some of the information that we're providing for you is, I think it's well aligned with your goals to kind of get the word out on this, but we're still working on numbers. So we're going to give you some preliminary information. There's a lot of information that in their presentation that's not in your packet. We'll bring that back, obviously, in either a future work session or more of a agenda item. So with that, Brian, you want to jump into your presentation?
Thank you, John. So I'll try to move through this piece pretty quickly so we can get to the financial component. But basically, I'm going to cover the CIP update that we did. So what is it? Why did we do it? How was it accomplished? What did we learn? What were our findings? And then the all-important last item of how much will it cost. Feel free to interrupt me along the way if you got questions. The slides have a lot of words on them. I'm going to try not to read to you, though. So you did your last water distribution system master plan in 2012. That's a state requirement. It's in the Oregon Administrative Rules. The Drinking Water Services Program of the Oregon Health Authority requires it. You have to have a 20-year plan, and it must be maintained as current. I put current in quotes because that is exactly what the language says. And the master plan ultimately results in a capital improvement plan. What are the water system improvements that are needed? At least a 20-year view, and often we look beyond that because water system facilities last 50 to 100 years a lot of times. So as we got into this project, we recognized that there was a lot about the 2012 plan that was still valid, and so we didn't need to do a full new plan. We really focused on the pieces where things had changed, and that's really what this project is. So the things that have changed include updated population and water demand projections. Obviously, you've got some growth areas. The concept planning has advanced there, and we wanted to factor that in. One of the biggest things is that staff observed some specific operational challenges and issues that we wanted to make sure we were addressing. And then we're finding for water systems across the board that capital maintenance projects, things like painting reservoirs, have become a pretty significant expense and really need to be factored in on the capital side. They've gone beyond what's reasonable in an operations budget. So how we went about this was really to pull a lot of that new information. So we looked at the new demographic data that was available in terms of population forecasts countywide. We reviewed water use trends. We're seeing declining trends as population grows, and so we needed to factor that in. The water system hydraulic model was updated. I won't bore you with those details, but we go through an exercise of trying to make sure the model reflects the real world. We used the existing water system master plan because that document does still have a lot of valid components. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. Staff provided a lot of input in workshops, information directly on the ground that's really important. And then there's been some additional studies that have been completed. We wanted those to also inform this. The bottom line is there are things that have changed in the last 7 years, and it was time to do an update. So the findings, I'll kind of break into categories really around the types of projects you need. So the first one is that capital maintenance. This is system renewal and replacement. Water system facilities can last 25 years on the short end, and pipelines can last 100 years at times. And so we really want to start planning for that. Oregon City has the whole range of 100-year-old facilities to relatively new facilities. We need to start planning for that renewal and replacement as things fail. So reservoir coatings is a significant one. You've got several reservoirs, they need to be painted. Exterior every 15-ish years, the interior 20, 25 years. And so those are big projects that we needed to factor in. Pump stations also need to be rehabilitated. Electrical equipment gets old, pumps fail. That work needs to happen. Pressure reducing valve replacements. And then the biggest one really is ongoing for every utility main replacements. Even pipes that last 75 or 80 years, up to 100 years, they do reach the end of their life eventually. They become a pretty significant liability. Main breaks cost a lot of money to repair, staff being called out at odd hours to do work. And so you really need to be starting to plan for those replacements over time. In addition, the city is growing, so there's capacity improvements that are needed. The transmission main in Malal Avenue is an example. Getting new piping in that part of the city as street projects are happening, it's a nice opportunity to double up and do that work. You've always got undersized mains, every community does. Fire flow requirements go up, piping is largely sized for fire flow, and so as we need to increase our fire flow capacity, we need larger pipes. The distribution system works best when pipe is looped. So looping improvements need to continue to happen. So the more of a grid you have on every street, the better the system operates. And then from staff, we identified the opportunity to reduce the number of pressure reducing valves in the system and really reduce an ongoing operation and maintenance cost. Again, future growth, this is most significant in the 3 concept plan areas. So the South End, Beaver Creek, and Park Place areas. All 3 of them, specifically Beaver Creek and Park Place, require storage, pumping, and piping improvements. So pretty significant system expansion in order to serve the growth when it occurs. We need to plan for that so that we have the capital plan in place and can plan rates and SDCs around that. So I blew through that really fast, but getting to the bottom line here, all the way out at the right bottom hand corner of this table, you see the bottom line total CIP at about $80 million, and then backing up, breaking that up into a couple pieces. You've got close to 30, a little over 30 million of that is in renewal and replacement costs for the system. Almost 50,000 is in capacity, and a big chunk of it is potentially in the 20-year window, but might be well beyond. So it really depends on when does growth occur, when do those concept plan areas actually develop. And as you'll see in the later slide, a lot of this does have an SDC component to it. That's important. It is really a lot of improvements around the need for meeting the requirements for growth.
Quick question.
Yes.
In the category of capacity and operations project cost, are those dollars to maintain existing flow rates or to provide for future demand, or both?
It's a little of both. The majority of the capacity improvements are for future demand. There are some that are to address existing deficiencies in the systems. There's places where pipes currently are undersized, facilities need to be upgraded. This is just a graphical illustration of that, where that $80 million is. The highlights here are that the majority of the red, those are the improvements you see are kind of clustered in the 3 concept plan areas. And so most of the improvements are there, but you see a significant piece between the Mountain View Reservoir into the Beaver Creek area that's associated with upsizing transmission capacity. That's both for existing needs and for growth. But again, most of the improvements are for serving those growth areas.
So quick question, have you separated out capacity building versus maintenance so that we could properly apply SDCs?
We have, and you'll actually hear more about that in the next presentation, but every one of these projects is either 100% growth, 0% for growth, or there's a lot of them that are actually a split, and so a portion of them are related for growth and some are for existing customers. Every single project has been allocated that way.
And those splits are based on hydraulic model
That's correct.
ratios, right? So there's science behind that split.
I think the main thing is they just need to be identified properly in our master plan, right? So that we could then properly use the funds. If, everybody always says, why can't we use SDCs? And, for every project that comes up and so.
Yep.
That was actually the second part.
There will, just so you know, there will be just like, I don't know if you remember in the Transportation System Master Plan, that's kind of the most recent one that we update. Specific lists, specific percentages of growth related improvements and, the dollar amounts associated with that, so. So that's the very good 12-minute version of the engineering side of this. There's a lot of details there. I don't have a strong sense of how much of that you want to dig into in the future when we bring that back to you, but for one, we've put a lot of time into this. I mean, I think we've been working with Brian on this update since about late 2016, 17, and a lot of that's been informed by a lot of historical data about our SCADA system, how our system operates, a lot of detailed evaluations of some of our more important facilities, pressure reducing valves, looking at reservoirs. There's been a lot of energy put into that. So the engineering side of this study, to me, I have a high level of confidence on, and I don't know how much detail you want. That's varied from commission to commission. So, you know, we get that engineering is not that exciting sometimes.
It's exciting.
But
Very
there's
exciting.
There's a detailed, I mean, their analysis and their report is in the information you had. You like it? Oh, good.
I like it so much that I'd like to ask an engineering and maintenance question.
Oh, man.
Do we have a preventative maintenance program that includes a projected failure based on hours of use? Say, for example, that a pump is in use. Like we probably have multiple pumps of the same brand. We probably have a failure rate on some of them historical that hopefully we have the data that says this pump fails at 40,000 hours. Do we have that kind of data? Do we have a preventative maintenance program, and how sophisticated is it?
Go ahead.
Engineering.
Yeah, so generally speaking, when we plan for operation of pump stations where there's multiple pumps, we try to make sure that the operations is set up so that the pump cycle and tend to have uniform hours of operation amongst them. That allows us to then kind of look more at a life cycle on a year basis. So we'll look at a life of a pump, maybe 20 years. We have the number here, I don't recall it specifically, but the pump will last 20 years under normal operation. And what we're watching for is, are the pumps cycling like they should, so that you do see that balance? And that does allow us to plan for that and replace them before they go to failure. Small pumps, it's oftentimes run to failure.
Sure.
Large pumps, we're going to want to plan ahead for and make sure that we're addressing them before. So it is included in here to have that capital maintenance for the pump stations and make sure that's being addressed.
That's the answer I'm looking for. Thanks.
Next,
I have a question.
go ahead.
I would be, not for tonight, but I would be interested in having some additional information about the seismic upgrades and what that involves, and in addition to any other sorts of, acts of God, natural disasters, or how we're, planning for, if something happens. I mean, we all know recently in Portland, they had that water main break and flooded everybody's houses and so forth. Not that we would have that, but those are things that we don't have much control over, and I know we have contingency plans and those sort of things.
Okay.
Thank you.
So John Ghilardici, who some of
Thank
you
you.
have heard from before, he's with FCS Group, and they've been exclusively over the years the financial analysis firm that we've used to help us with rate analysis. They've done our transportation, wastewater, water. We've got a stormwater master plan that's coming forward that we haven't hired them yet for, but we probably will. And so the good thing about that is there's a lot of, John carries a lot of institutional knowledge. He's been our one point of contact for, even though there's other people in the office that help you with that. But so anyway, John.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. So our focus is on how do we pay for the capital projects that in the plan that Brian just talked about. Our focus tonight is on rate impacts. We'll be back to talk about calculated system development charges that would accompany this plan. But the rate results, preliminary rate results I share with you should hold true either way, regardless of what we do with SDCs, because we are accounting for SDC revenues as we project. So what we'll do, I'll talk a little bit about the key assumptions that we build into our forecasts, how we're spreading the capital costs, at least initially, and then go through a number of different scenarios, rate scenarios that are essentially options for you to consider. These are the key assumptions. When we do these are multi-worksheet, spreadsheet analyses, we build in inflation rates and growth rates to try and be as accurate in forecasting as we can. And then we go out 20 years in our forecast. So these are just the inflators that we use based on recent history. We inflate different expenses differently. We've been fairly conservative in our growth rate, assumed growth rate, about 1.5% per year. We forecast operating revenues and costs off of the budget, and then we build in the capital projects that come out of Brian's master plan work. There are a couple scenarios in which we look at debt issuance, and those are the terms there. That 5% interest rate is pretty conservative. You can get better terms now, but again, we're trying to be conservative with those assumptions. So again, all built in to these projections. So Brian mentioned $80+ million in capital projects. We know from the city's capital budget what is planned for in the next couple of years, this year, 2020 and 2021. Actually, 2020 is this year and 2021. So we've plugged those numbers in, and then everything else we spread basically based on the average level of capital spending per year through the 20 years. So this is how that would look. It would basically be a capital budget that then the city would prioritize against when it took on any of the major projects you see at the bottom of the slide there. So one of the, we've talked about escalated and unescalated. That $80+ million is the unescalated number, and we're showing it spread as if there were no inflation. All of our revenue requirement scenarios apply inflation, and that's all accounted for in the later numbers you'll see. So as you know, there's a charter amendment in place that requires a public vote if the city is to raise rates by more than 3% per year, and also issue any issuance of additional revenue bond debt also requires a public vote. So the first scenario we want to look at is what can be done under that charter amendment. And this just shows you how much of the capital plan can be done with the charter amendment in place. There's about 14 million, 13.6 million of that 83 million that would not be funded at 3% per year, taking into account SDC revenues as well as we can for the 20-year period.
SDC revenues are assumed to be unchanging over that 20-year period?
Yeah, so we've calculated a preliminary system development charge where we are still working on exactly how much capacity we think the system will provide, which is the denominator in the SDC calculation. So safest assumption is to assume that the SDC is basically unchanged for the period. It may go up, it may actually go down, depending on the denominator discussion that we finish in the next couple of weeks. So that's why we decided to just assume the same. And those revenues, the thing about SDC revenues, they're a very important offsetting revenue to the rates, but they occur over such a long period of time. You know, if our denominator is growth to build out, you're not going to recover all those SDC eligible costs until build out. And we're trying to get these built in the next 20 years. So it does provide offsetting revenue, but not the full SDC eligible amount, if that makes sense.
It does, and actually my concern would be, you know, since it appears that most of these projects are involved in servicing new areas, I want the SDCs to bear hopefully a proportionate amount of that, or at least as much as we can, so that we don't shift the financing to the existing ratepayers.
And so we do include every eligible dollar in the calculation of the system development charge. And so what the ratepayers construct in the next 20 years, they will be repaid by SDCs. After that, the problem is just you don't get the cash from SDCs right when you need it. It occurs over a longer period of time. But in the end, everybody's made whole. It's just a reimbursement basically to the ratepayers who've made that initial investment.
So what would it take, rate increase wise, if we increase the ability for the city to, say, charge 3.5%?
One of our scenarios, and so the first one, this shows rate, so the dotted black line here shows rate revenues at 3% per year increases. And that expanding silver portion of the stacked bar, that's the capital spending that the city can do. And this is what leaves you about 14 million short against the 83. So getting to your question, Mr. Mayor, if we were to raise the rates as needed to fund the whole capital plan, we show 3% in 2020, 10.5% increases in fiscal years 21, 22, and 23, and then you can get back to the 3% or inflationary increases after that. So there's a small hill, not small, a hill to climb, and then back to inflationary increases. We also looked at what would it take to do one increase and then do 3% after that. And that's this next one, which we're calling front-loaded. If the city were to do one 22% increase in 2021, then it could go right back to the 3% increases per year after that and get it all done with cash, no debt required. So I think that answers your question. We also did look at what if we were to incorporate debt, which would require two public votes, the one on the debt issue and one to exceed the 3% per year. That would require, it's close. That would require a 3% increase in 2020 and then several 4% increases in order to meet the debt requirements. And then you're back to the 3% per year. Total of about 38 million in new debt issued as a result of this plan.
So what's the number that is across the board that would make that happen? So instead of, a 22% increase, can we get somewhere, is it 4.5% a year?
Oh.
That would get you to that same
That
level?
each year, what would the smooth number be?
Yeah.
So I don't have that tonight, but I can get that for you and
Because
provide it.
this is a political issue. And so, you don't want, the reason we have this now is because the city raised rates 67% overnight on a Thursday in December.
We were there.
So what I'm trying to say is, if we're gonna go out to a vote, let's get it so we say it's gonna be 4.5% a year going forward, and that fixes it, rather than have to try to make these gigantic rate increases.
Much more
Gotcha.
palatable.
Yes. Back to boiling the frog.
But at some point, I understand the delay in SDCs coming into play. But there's never a future point when they do come into play when rates decline, is there? They will
Well,
always.
In theory, there is, so we get out beyond 20 years and now the CIP has been executed, pretending that there aren't new projects that need to be done then.
Let's not.
SDCs will continue to come in. And as a result, the rates will be artificially lower than they would have normally needed to be because those SDCs are basically funding the capital plan at that time. So those longer term ratepayers are the beneficiaries of that reimbursement. But it will suppress the rates at that point.
And we
Again,
still have
if
a
everything-
lot of place to grow, unlike Gladstone or West Lynn, where they're pretty much landlocked. We can
Built
grow
out.
all the way to almost to Canby.
But what I'm hearing is concern that the existing citizens are not paying for new growth. That's paid for, to the degree it can be, paid for through a calculated SDC that meets those new growth needs. That makes sense.
I don't want to flash back to 96 when we were on the other side of the coin.
So the last one I'll show you is, we're calling this one front-loaded with debt. What if you bundled all that debt up front? What would that single rate increase be? 9% in 2021, and then back to the 3% per year. So the previous one had a number of debt issues every other year. This one brings them forward. And it's just, again, would just require the one increase, but we'll bring back the smooth.
How much does that add on to the 82 million or whatever it is?
In interest?
Yeah.
You mean, yeah, it's a significant number. I can get that total of payments for you as well.
Because my
Yeah.
preference is to be like South Fork Water, where I would rather we don't have any debt and we're paying
Sure.
our way as we go.
And you're in a position to do that, in my opinion, without, if it weren't for the 3% limit, the rate increases are, I don't want to minimize them, but they're not, it's not like you're looking at 10 years of double-digit increases. You are in a position to cash fund this CIP with some tweaks.
Okay.
I thought Ryan asked a good question just before the meeting. Is how there's not a lot of agencies that have that limitation, right? That 3% limitation. But West Lynn has that limitation, and theirs is set at 5%. Had that changed, we'd still be having a conversation about capital, but probably wouldn't have to have a conversation about a vote to change that because we would have been implementing something different in terms of rate increases.
So one of the interesting, what we're looking at here is the cumulative percentage increases over time for each of those scenarios. So that black solid line at the bottom there, that is the 3% per year. What's interesting, at least I think it's interesting, is if you look at pay-go and front-loaded, that's the pale green and the sort of lavender ones. Those are both all cash, no debt. So initial rate increases you see are higher, but if you look out to 2038, the rates are actually lower at the end of the period, and you've constructed the entire CIP in both of those scenarios. Whereas in the baseline, those rates, you see where they are in 2038, and you've only done that 69 million of the 83 million. So interesting, of course, that's pretty long-term to be thinking about beneficial rating impacts, but we thought it was noteworthy. Both of the debt-funded scenarios, of course, the rates are higher and will be for some time while you're repaying that debt.
Yeah, I just did the compounding interest number, and over 10 years, it's like 56% increase in the bill over 10 years.
Right.
Okay.
So and on this table, we show the cumulative increase on the right, which I think is comparable to your numbers. Where we are at the end of 2038 after the increases associated with each of these scenarios, and then the total amount of debt issued for the two debt scenarios. And just a glimpse at what's going on in neighboring communities, comparable utilities, just the water rates for a typical single-family residence with 800 cubic feet of usage in a month. We didn't put every scenario, but hopefully you can get an idea from this.
Is this 2019 number?
Well, it's fiscal year 2020 right now, and then the two, you see Oregon City 2021 and pay-go and debt. Those are next year's rates for Oregon City. The one thing we don't know, which may be to your point, is that a lot of these numbers are going to change because they will go up next year as well. And that's what we have for you.
Okay. Questions?
Just generally, what are the next steps? What are your plans?
So we've got a couple of meetings in the next couple of weeks to kind of firm up these numbers and probably use some of Ryan's analytical skills too, just to kind of make sure we're fully engaged, make sure our two consultants, are aligned with their numbers. And then what we'd like to do is if there's any changes here, bring these changes back, but bring back that whole SDC piece as well. And probably do that in another work session. And then depending on that determination as to what we, need to get from you, I think it would be helpful for us as we move forward, maybe in the next meeting, to get a better understanding is we recognize, as a commission, we recognize that the 3% isn't going to be enough, or we want you to stick right there, and then we'll have, then it's back to pushing out the capital plan in a way that, hopefully doesn't result in, catastrophe that would be problematic. But we recognize in your goals, there's a recognition right now that we're going to a vote. So trying to get geared up with the right public information to be successful with that.
Well, Mr. Lewis, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the public's concern, if their awareness level is what it should be, is like, are we subsidizing new growth?
Yep.
And, we just recently amended SDCs, did we not? Or
Transportation,
transportation, but not this.
right, not water.
So, maybe that needs to be part of the discussion too.
Okay, anything else?
Yes, John, how will the public be engaged in this?
So, okay, so public engagement on things like the engineering work is always a challenge. I know there's folks in the room here tonight, but I'm pretty sure they're not here for this particular topic. If it's about a rate increase or the effort to get a successful vote of that, I think early on, it's about establishing good information for the public to know about the system, and then a determination about the vote itself. And then at that point in time, city has to kind of back off and let, stakeholders or groups that, will advocate for that or not, do their
I
thing.
wondered if you were going to make a brief presentation to the Citizen Involvement Committee.
Oh, we sure can do that. That's definitely
Okay.
easy. Yeah, CIC, okay.
Okay? Anything else?
Just,
All right.
I'm going to make one comment. I think Commissioner Lyle Smith's question about breaking down the cost between maintaining his existing capacity and increasing capacity is going to be an integral part of that calculation to sell to the public.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then we're adjourned. We'll come back to the regular commission meeting at 7:10.